I can't believe that I'm actually going to tell this story. My friends are telling me that I'm going insane, but I know what I saw out there. A week ago, my friends and I traveled a few hours away from home to visit a hiking trail in Utah. Over the years, the 5 of us have easily covered several hundred miles of forest, canyons, and mountains together. Some people like to play sports, some play cards, some start a band. We like to hike. We always have. It's how we met, in fact. Almost a decade ago now, my friend Isaac started an unofficial hiking club in our Colorado high school. He'd traveled across the country with his father a few times, visiting hiking trails all along the way. As a sophomore in high school, I had never gone hiking before. When I accepted Isaac's invitation, I did so as his friend, not as a hiking hobbyist. We were the only members for a while, of course. It's hard to find high school kids who want to spend their time walking in the woods. But we eventually met Josh, a shy guy who had just moved to town from Florida. He was quick to join our club when we'd offered him a spot. I still have a feeling that he'd done it in a desperate act to make some friends. Dakota joined next. When we'd originally created our club, I had never expected a girl to join it. I had seen Dakota around school before, but we were part of very different crowds. I don't think I'd even had a conversation with her prior to joining. Needless to say, we were shocked when she asked to be part of the club. After Dakota joined, we decided it was about time to actually start hiking. She found it somewhat amusing that we'd never actually gone hiking before then. We chose a hiking trail Dakota knew about nearby. She told us that she used to hike there with her parents and sister when she was younger. Before that day, I had always seen Dakota, and every other popular student for that matter, as obnoxious jerks. It's how they had always acted towards my friends and I, anyways. It didn't take me long to discover that she was nothing like that at all, however. She didn't even seem to care whether people saw her hanging around us. She saw that we shared a hobby and wanted to take advantage of that. In hindsight, these thoughts are pretty trivial, obviously, but to me, at the time, it meant a lot. It taught me that we're all pretty similar when we take away the arbitrary social statuses. We quickly started to become close. Our hiking trip started off as a monthly event, at best. After about a year, however, we were hiking on a new trail almost every weekend. We saw a lot of beautiful things together, a lot of crazy things too. We met our 5th member, Charlie, on a hiking trail in California. He'd started to walk along the trail just as we had. So, we began to talk to one another, naturally. Needless to say, he fit into our group perfectly. We exchanged numbers and planned several more trips with him over the past few years. A week ago, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Isaac's car. A song was blasting on the radio. I don't remember which. "Are we there yet?" Josh moaned from the back seat. I looked over my shoulder, smirking at Dakota as she rolled her eyes. "That joke wasn't even funny back when it was supposed to be, Josh." "The only thing that isn't funny is that you think I'm joking," he said, adjusting his jeans. "I have to fucking piss." Dakota laughed as Isaac looked at her friend in the rearview mirror. "Do you want me to pull over, or can you hold it until we reach the next potty?" he mocked. Josh ignored the jab. "What? You want me to piss on the side of the road?" "I want you to stop complaining," Isaac said, laughing. "What's the harm in it anyway? There's nobody else on the road." Josh narrowed his eyes, turning to Dakota. "Really, Josh?" she said, shaking her head. "I'll turn around, don't worry." Josh had opened the door before Isaac had even stopped the car. I watched Josh in the side mirror as he nearly fell from the car, unzipping his pants. The 3 of us chuckled as I undid my seatbelt, opening my door. "What? Gonna help him?" Isaac said, causing Dakota to laugh. I scoffed. We've been in here for hours, just stretching my legs. I said, stepping out of the car as Josh gave me a weird look. I groaned, stretching my arms behind my head as I looked out into the empty field that nearly reached the horizon. My eyes landed on the skull of a deer as I listened to my friends talking behind me. "Aww," Dakota said from inside the car. "It's cute and tiny." She was obviously fucking with Josh. "What?" he said, shuffling away from the door. "You can't even see me," he cried out, obviously flustered and embarrassed. He had never been good at sensing jokes. I barely listened to their conversation. My eyes remained glued to the skull. Its antlers were huge, with more points than I'd ever seen before. The back of the skull faced the car, but I could tell that the front was still intact. "Hey guys," I said, looking back to the car. "Look at this thing." I saw Isaac lean over the driver's seat. "Wow, now that's a beauty." I looked back at the skull, gasping. The deer skull was now facing directly towards me. "Whoa," I said, taking a step back. "What?" Josh said, zipping up his pants. "Did that thing just move?" I asked, looking back to my friends. Josh stared briefly at the skull before turning back to me. "It might just be me, Alex, but I'm pretty sure that thing's dead." I groaned, stepping back towards the car. "Never mind," I said, looking back at the skull as I sat down in the passenger seat. Was I seeing things? "Poor thing," Dakota said, staring at the skull through the window as Isaac pulled out onto the road. "Things die, Dakota," Josh said, wiping his hands on his pants. "That doesn't mean I can't feel bad about it," she said, smirking at her friend. It was obvious that she wasn't very upset. I remained relatively quiet for the rest of the car ride. The deer skull was all that remained on my mind. I couldn't have just imagined that, could I have? Before I even realized it, we were in the parking lot just outside of the trail. Dakota's eyes lit up as she looked out the window. "There he is!" Charlie waved his hand as we parked the car. We stepped out of the car, Josh moving to the trunk to unload our things. Dakota ran up to Charlie and gave him a hug. I couldn't help but let an odd feeling of jealousy pass over me. I imagine I don't have to tell you why. "Give me a hand, will you?" Josh said, holding out a backpack to me. I nodded absently, swinging the backpack over my shoulder. I just can't wait to see the canyons. Josh grunted in agreement. "I hear they're beautiful. Maybe they'll be romantic enough for you to finally talk to you-know-who," he said, smirking. I sighed, looking away. I'd always regretted my feelings for Dakota to him. He chuckled. "I got the rest," he said, reaching back into the trunk. I nodded, walking over to my friends. Isaac pulled away from his own hug with Charlie. My Californian friend smiled when he saw me. "Alex!" I returned the smile, embracing him. I could feel his hand slapping against my back as he made eye contact with Dakota, who was now smiling at us. "It's been a while, man," I said, stepping away. "You can say that again," he said, looking towards the trail. "I'm itching to head out." Without saying hello to me first, Josh said, stepping up from behind me. "How could I forget you, Josh?" Charlie chuckled. I strolled towards the trail as my friends greeted one another. The entrance was surrounded by a large number of trees. As I admired the trees, a disturbing howl sounded from somewhere far away. The noise sounded almost human, but I couldn't imagine a person making such a noise. "Is everything all right, man?" Isaac said. I hadn't heard him approach. I turned quickly over my shoulder. Oh yeah, no, everything's fine." He nodded, frowning. "Are you sure? You've been pretty quiet." I nodded again. Don't worry about me, Isaac. I just want to get moving. He sighed, glancing back to the others as they began to walk towards us. If you say so, he said, looking back to me before walking towards the trail. I fell in behind the others as they funneled into the trail. Josh and Charlie led the group, joking back and forth. They had always been the most alike. Isaac and Dakota chatted a few yards ahead of me. I remained by myself in the back, just admiring the views. Large rock formations could be seen in the distance. They were breathtaking, even from this far away. I noticed Isaac glance back to me a few times during our walk, but I ignored it. I had other things on my mind. What had I heard howling before? It had to be some kind of wolf, I'd imagined. That, combined with the odd encounter with the skull, had shaken me. I noticed Isaac beginning to speed up to catch up to the others. Dakota slowed, spinning her head around, her ponytail bouncing around through the hole in the back of her baseball cap. She smiled as I approached. Hey, eh? I gave her a polite smile as she began to walk beside me. Hey, I said, looking back out towards the rock formations. They're pretty, aren't they? She said, scratching her arm. This is probably one of my favorite views we've seen so far, I said, looking back at her. She was staring at me. Why are you being so quiet? Dakota asked, glancing to her feet as she stepped over a large rock. I sighed, shrugging. I don't know. I just saw some weird stuff back there. That's all. She nodded. Well, start talking, she said, smiling. We don't get to do this enough anymore. I don't see you that often, okay? I couldn't help but smile. I'm fine. Trust me. I just got a little spooked. I'm okay. Good, she said, lightly shoving me. Thanks, Alex. I nodded, watching as Charlie and Josh began to argue with Isaac up ahead. What's going on? I called out. Isaac turned back towards us, throwing his hands up in the air. These idiots want to start walking off the trail. Josh scoffed. Well, why not? I groaned. No, man, I think I heard a wolf earlier. We'll be safer on the trails. I don't know, Dakota said, looking up to me. I think it could be fun. Yeah, don't kill the party, you two, Charlie said as he stepped off the path with Josh. Isaac looked back to me, defeated before following the others. I guess it's decided then, I sighed, walking with Dakota towards the others. It'll be fun, Alex. Don't worry. I walked with Dakota for a while. We were mostly quiet, just enjoying each other's company. Every now and then, we'd point out a cool rock structure in the distance, or a deep canyon. I found myself staring at Dakota a few times, as creepy as it may sound. I had to stop myself from telling her the truth several times. I slowed down as we approached the others who had stopped ahead. We were all on the edge of a cliff, Josh and Charlie standing on the edge. Isaac was looking through his backpack, eventually pulling out a granola bar. Dakota sighed as she sat down on one of the rocks nearby, removing her shoes. God, my feet are killing me right now. Join the club, Charlie said, stepping away from the edge. Careful, Josh. Yeah, I got it, he said, looking down into the canyon. I'm just getting a better look. I opened my own backpack, removing my bottle of water and taking a long sip. I hadn't realized how thirsty I'd been. Josh, get over here, Isaac called out, shaking his head. I don't trust you over there. I looked over to our friend, who was now standing even closer to the edge. No, wait, I see something. I was suddenly on edge. Charlie began to walk towards Josh. You're too close, man. Josh shrugged off the warning, leaning further over the canyon. I think it's some kind of animal, he said, shifting his foot. Josh gasped as the rock beneath his foot fell into the canyon, his body following it. Josh! Dakota cried as our friend fell into the canyon. Silence filled the air for several seconds, followed by a loud thud. Josh's screaming began almost instantaneously. Charlie was over the side of the cliff in seconds. Isaac, Dakota, and I followed quickly, peering over the edge. It was thankfully not as far down as I had imagined it to be. It had to be only 40 feet high at the most. Small ledges lined the sidewalls of the canyon. Charlie was already halfway down. The three of us, without thinking, began to descend the wall of the canyon. Josh's cries grew louder as we approached, his voice echoing between the rock walls. I nearly vomited as I reached the bottom. I hadn't seen Josh from the top of the canyon. I hadn't seen his leg. A jagged, snapped bone stuck out of Josh's skin, about halfway up his calf. His foot dangled loosely below it. Blood had started to pool out of the wound. Jesus, Isaac said as Charlie knelt beside his friend, removing a shirt and beginning to tie it around the wound. I trusted that Charlie knew what he was doing, even if he didn't. Dakota had started to cry. She was beside me, her face in her hands. I hesitated before putting my arm briefly around her shoulder, trying to calm her. I'm sure Josh didn't need to be stressed out any further. Isaac and Charlie were knelt beside Josh, who was crying out in pain. We have to get him back to the car, Isaac said, rubbing his forehead. We're not going back out that way, Charlie said, eyeing the wall. Not with his leg. I rubbed Dakota's arm, looking around. My eyes landed on a dark hole near the end of the canyon. Hey, I think there's a cave down there. Everyone, save for Josh, simultaneously turned their heads towards the cave. Charlie hummed. Are you suggesting we bring Josh underground? I shook my head. No, I'm just saying there might be another exit through there, that's all. Isaac looked back to Josh. That's probably our best bet. If anything, we have to move that way anyways, he said, pointing behind him. I don't see anything down there. Charlie nodded, reaching for Josh's arm. Well, we've got to move quick, whatever we do. Charlie and Isaac held Josh up to his feet, who swore loudly as his foot swung at the end of his leg. I had to look away. I felt almost as comforted with my arm around Dakota as she likely did, but I moved it anyways. The five of us began to move slowly towards the end of the canyon. We didn't speak, but our thoughts were shared. We didn't know what we'd do if the cave led nowhere. Josh had started to cry by the time we reached the cave. Guys, I'm so sorry, he cried out. Keep calm, Josh, Isaac said. We're getting you to the hospital. I'm so fucking sorry, he cried, shaking his head. Thank you guys so much for being my friends. I love you all so much. I felt my heart begin to hurt. He was speaking as someone who thought they were dying would. My father spoke that same way when I was younger, right after his first heart attack. Don't worry, Josh, Charlie said, stepping away from our friend as Isaac took all of his weight. He stepped towards the cave opening, turning on his phone flashlight before looking back to me. Alex, come with me. I didn't hesitate. I followed Charlie into the cave, my heart racing. I knew we had to get Josh out of here soon. Charlie's phone flashlight hit the back wall of the cavern we were standing in. I stared in confusion at the wall. Pictures had been drawn into the wall. The largest drawing depicted a mass of simplified stick-based people. Above it, a giant animal had been drawn. It had large antlers, and its legs seemed to be abnormally long. Wow, Charlie said, shining his light across the drawings. Is this like prehistoric shit? Like caveman drawings? I don't know, I replied. I turned over my shoulder. The other three were shuffling slowly into the cave. Charlie turned to them. You three stay there. Alex and I will move ahead and see what we can find. The others agreed. Charlie and I began moving through the only tunnel that rested in the wall of the cavern. After a few minutes of slowly walking, I began to make out a brief source of light up ahead. Charlie, I cried. I saw it too, he said, turning over his shoulder. I expected my friend to call out to the others, so his silence shocked me. I looked at him, his flashlight pointed at the wall. Within it sat a new tunnel, narrower than this one. What, Charlie? He didn't look at me. I just saw someone. I froze. What? I just saw someone, Alex, he repeated, stepping towards the tunnel. I reached forwards, grabbing his shoulder. Whoa, man, what are you doing? What are you talking about? Charlie yanked his arm away. What if they can help Josh? He said, stepping into the tunnel. I stammered, not knowing what to do. Guys, come on! I shouted back down the tunnel before following Charlie. My friend shuffled ahead, squeezing through the tight space. I tried to call Charlie back, but he wouldn't stop moving. He wouldn't even respond. It was like he was in a trance. I watched Charlie stumble out of the tunnel in front of me. He shined his light into a new chamber. I could feel the walls pushing against my lungs as I pushed my way into the cavern. The end of the tunnel came quickly. I fell to the floor, the air knocked from my lungs. I looked up. Fear began to course through me. We were high up in the cavern, on a ledge looking over the rest of the chamber. Down below, a large mass of people stood, unmoving. They were all completely naked and appeared to be of all possible shapes and colors. There were dozens of them, perhaps even hundreds. I couldn't really remember. Torches had been set up near the back of the room. Surrounded in a circle of light stood a large creature. Its legs were horrifically long and seemed to be bent in the wrong places. Its head resembled the skull of a deer, its antlers nearly scraping the ceiling. Its empty, black eye sockets were staring directly at me. Jesus Christ, I said, pushing myself to my feet. I stumbled towards the tunnel. It's so beautiful, Charlie said, staring at the creature. I turned back towards my friend, appalled. Charlie! My friend didn't reply. Without speaking, he leapt. I jumped forward, attempting to grab him, but it was too late. My friend fell silently to the cave floor, landing on the top of several awaiting people. The crowd began to close in around him, their bodies blocking the view of my friend. Several of the people continued to stare at me, waiting. I was frozen in shock. I looked back to the creature. It was now walking briskly across the cavern in my direction, its legs moving almost like a spider's. My heart nearly stopped then. I hadn't even seen the thing start to move. I practically fell back into the tight tunnel, pushing my way back to the main corridor. I ran into the wall in the main tunnel. I could barely see anything at all. I heard a gasp from up ahead. Oh, Jesus, Alex? Dakota called from up ahead. We thought you'd gone outside. Run! I said, moving quickly towards the exit of the cave. My friends moved as fast as they could, though they had no idea why. I tried to explain what had happened to Charlie when they'd made it outside, but the others didn't believe me. Isaac cut me off, telling me that we just needed to get Josh to a hospital. It's been a week since everything happened. For days, Dakota and Isaac have asked me where Charlie went. I keep telling them, but even I'm starting to doubt my own story. Isaac seems convinced that we must have seen some kind of animal in there, like a bear or something, but I know what I saw. Dakota came to my house yesterday, and we had a long talk about everything. I think she believes me. The doctors say that Josh is going to be okay. Thank fucking God. But I don't know what to do. Dakota told me she wants to go back. She thinks Charlie still might be alive. I don't want her to go. I love her. She doesn't know it, but I do. Maybe she does know, and maybe she's just good at hiding it. The point is, I don't want to lose her too. I don't know what I'm going to do. I could go back with her to the cave, or I could go alone. Maybe I'll try to convince Isaac. God, maybe I won't even go. As horrible as it sounds. He might just be gone. I saw how he acted in that cave. He wanted to be with that thing. I need to think. Whatever the case may be, I think I'm taking a break from hiking after this. Hello again, Reddit. I'd like to imagine I would have made the decision to return to the cave on my own, but I'd be lying if I said that your comments hadn't pushed me in that direction. I called Dakota at around 7 o'clock last night. She picked up almost immediately. "Hey Alex, what's up?" she asked, her voice slightly electronic. "I've been thinking," I said, trailing off. "Did I really want to do this?" "Yeah?" she pushed, anticipation in her voice. I sighed. "I think we should go back to the cave," I said. My words met with silence. "I know Charlie's alive. He has to be." More silence came through the cell phone. "I was thinking the same thing," Dakota finally said, her voice quiet. We talked for a little while, and then we decided we should go tonight. There was no use in putting this off any longer. I was outside of her house at 8 o'clock. We both called off work for the next day, and we were ready to leave. The front door of her house opened within the first minute that I'd pulled into the driveway. She wore the same pink baseball cap from the week before, her blonde ponytail sticking through the back. I smiled as she stepped into my car. "Hey, Alex," she said, shutting the door behind her. She was trying to make this meeting feel normal, but it was anything but normal. "Hey," I said, gripping the steering wheel. She looked at my hands. "Are you feeling okay, Alex?" I nodded. "Don't worry about me, Dakota. I'm just a bit nervous is all," I said, giving her a polite smile. I glanced at her hat. "I like the hat," I said, confusing myself. She hadn't expected the compliment either. "Oh, yeah, thanks. I don't really know why I put it on, to be honest. The sun isn't going to be up for a long time anyways," she said, laughing nervously. We didn't mention it, but we both felt it. This was the most awkward conversation we've had between us since high school. She adjusted the hat on her head. "So, is Isaac coming with us?" I hadn't even thought of our friend, as bad as that sounds. Oh, I haven't talked to him. She nodded. Well, let's call him now. We can use all the help we can get. I pulled out my cell phone, scrolling through my contact list. Isaac's name was near the bottom. I clicked on his name and waited. Hey. Isaac finally picked up, sounding tired. I put the phone on speaker mode. Hey man, what are you doing right now? I'm with Josh, he said. I could hear Josh try to make a joke in response in the background. Dakota eyed me as I spoke. Isaac, we're going back, I said, suddenly nervous. Isaac remained silent for a few moments. No, you're not, Alex. I chewed my lip, looking at Dakota. We have to, Isaac. We just left Charlie there, man. We owe this to him. Isaac groaned through the phone. It sounded like he was walking now. Look, Alex, I don't know what you saw in that cave, but we have to be realistic here. I don't think he's going to be there anymore. I frowned, staring into Dakota's blue eyes. It sounds like you don't even care, Isaac. Jesus, Alex, he said, flustered. You know that isn't true. I'm just being realistic. What are we going to do if a bear got Charlie, or wolves? Hell, I'll humor your own theory for a minute. Say there is a giant deer, spider, whatever the fuck in that cave. What then? We'd be better off getting into a fist fight with a bear. I opened my mouth to speak, but I knew he was right. Isaac continued. Look, I say we go to the police. This is what they do. Dakota spoke. Why would they ever believe us? Isaac hesitated. He hadn't realized Dakota was with me. Just don't mention Alex's story. Tell them it was a bear. They can deal with whatever it ends up being. We waited a week, Isaac, she said. A whole fucking week. And we didn't mention this to anyone? What explanation would the police have for us holding that information? He said, trailing off. This is on us, she said, looking back to me. I can't leave him there. We have to try. And we're going to do it whether or not you come with us. Isaac groaned. You guys are thinking too quickly. I've sat around thinking for long enough, Dakota said. I'm going. I could hear Isaac swearing under his breath. He'd moved the phone from his face. Fine, he finally spoke, shocking me. Just start driving. The hospital's in the other direction. I'll meet you two there. Don't do anything stupid till I get there, okay? Please? Dakota smiled, relieved. Of course, Isaac. Our friend hung up. Dakota sighed, her head hitting the headrest behind her. I stared at her, fear suddenly filling me. Did I want her doing this? Could I even stop her? She turned her head to look at me, finding that I was already looking at her. Alex? I nodded. She chewed on her lip. Are we doing the right thing here? She asked. I sighed, looking out the window. I really don't know, Dakota. She nodded, rubbing her face. We can't leave him there. I know, I said, placing my hand on her arm. She seemed to relax. I'm with you, whatever you want to do. She smiled slightly, a smile I'd never seen from her before. Thank you, Alex. We drove all night. We stopped a few times. Dakota seemed to want to pull over, more than she had last week. Maybe she was stalling. If she was, I'd thank her for that. I pulled into the parking lot that sat in front of the trail at around 6 a.m. Only one other vehicle was there, a familiar black truck. I stepped out of my car, Dakota following as I approached Isaac's truck. Our friend stepped out of his vehicle. Jesus, what took you two so long? I thought you weren't coming after all. I looked to Dakota. Sorry, we had to stop a few times. Isaac nodded, moving to the back of his truck. Well, we may as well start moving, he said, moving to the back of his truck. I looked to Dakota briefly before following him. What's the plan here? Isaac reached into his truck bed, moving aside a tarp and pulling out a shotgun. I blinked, taken aback. Jesus, Isaac. Isaac didn't hesitate. What, Alex? What do you want from me? Something took Charlie. I'm sure as hell gonna bring something to protect myself, he said, looking to Dakota. To protect us. I nodded slowly, glancing to Dakota. She was staring at the weapon. I guess that makes sense to me, I said, watching as Isaac pulled a flashlight from the back of his truck. You can hold the flashlight, he said, tossing it to me. Now, you tell me what your plan is. This was your idea, not mine. I looked at Dakota. Was I making a mistake? Let's just head back to the cave. The sun should be up soon, I said, shrugging. Not that it will matter once we get in the cave. Isaac grunted. All right, but what if this thing finds us? What then? I thought for a moment. Well, the tunnel that leads to this thing is way too small for it to fit through. Hell, the rest of the cave isn't even big enough to hold it. I think it can only stay in that cavern. Isaac nodded. And what about the people then? I felt a chill run down my spine. Yeah, I'm not too sure about them. Isaac sighed. Well, it sounds like we'll be safe from the creature so long as we stay out of its chamber, he said slowly. He sounded like he really wanted to believe my words, but he was having trouble doing so. I'm just hoping that his followers, whatever they are, don't try to take us there. Dakota sighed loudly, startling me. We should just start moving. I want to get out there as soon as we can. Isaac nodded. I can't help but agree. We walked along the trail in silence. The remainder of the moonlight did a good job of lighting up most of the landscape for us. Before long, the sun would rise. We arrived to the canyon much faster than I would have liked to. Isaac stepped to the edge of the cliff, looking down to the bottom. I see a stain from Josh's blood. We're in the right place. I nodded, looking to Dakota. She appeared to be shaking. You doing okay? She looked to me, somehow surprised that I had asked. I'm fine. You can stay up here if you want, I said, slightly hoping that she would take my offer. Isaac and I can handle this. I'm fine, she snapped, instantly softening. I'm okay, Alex. You're not going down there without me. I nodded, looking to Isaac, who was now staring at us. You guys ready to go? I exhaled softly, gathering my nerves. As ready as I could be right now. Isaac grunted, beginning to climb down the canyon wall. I stepped up behind him, placing my foot on one of the ledges that protruded from the rock wall. I glanced back at Dakota before descending, slower than I had last time. My fingers gripped the wall as I continued to move down into the canyon. I was about 10 feet from the ground now. I looked down to the bottom, watching as Isaac brushed dirt from his shorts. My eyes moved down the canyon, landing on the cave's entrance. A figure stood in the opening, their arms hanging loosely at their sides. I was far away from the cave, but I was sure I wasn't just seeing things. What? I said, startled. My foot slipped from the edge, surprising me even further. I gripped the wall harder, but it was no use. My fingers slipped away from the wall as I fell backwards into the canyon. I couldn't have fallen much longer than 2 seconds. My back slammed against the floor of the canyon, oxygen immediately expelling from my lungs. I gasped, desperate for air, just as my back exploded in pain. Isaac was by my side in less than a second. "Alex! Alex!" he said. I could hear him, but my vision started to fade slightly. Was I passing out? Dakota was not by my side, but I couldn't hear her. I was completely disoriented. Dakota's words finally entered my ears. "Alex, are you okay?" she asked, fear in her eyes. "Alex, please." I forced myself to nod. Relief seemed to crash over my friends. "Jesus, are you sure?" she asked, her hand on my arm. I pushed myself to the sitting position. My back fucking hurt, but at least I wasn't paralyzed. "I'm okay," I said, my voice completely shaky. "Thank God," she said, resting her forehead against my shoulder. "I thought you just fucking killed yourself." I felt comforted with her by my side. My eyes moved back to the end of the canyon. The entrance to the cave was empty. "I think I saw someone down there," I said, pointing towards the cave. "Down by the cave?" Isaac asked, gripping his shotgun harder. "I think so," I said, not wanting to move away from Dakota. "Looks like they've been waiting for us then," he said, his voice finally showing signs of unease. "That's just fucking great." I pushed myself slowly to my feet. The flashlight had rolled away from me once it hit the ground. It was now laying beside the small rock. There was a small crack in the protective glass above the bulb, but it still turned on, thankfully. It was much better than our phones could ever be. We moved towards the cave slowly, a new feeling of horror passing over me. What if Isaac was right? Had they been waiting for us to return? I shined my flashlight into the cave as we approached. There was no one immediately inside. This didn't calm me down, however. "Let's head inside," I said, rubbing my back. It hurt like hell, but I'd survive. "You're the boss," Isaac said, stepping inside. I'm glad he had a gun. It's more than Charlie had, that's for sure. We walked deeper into the cave. I kept Dakota behind me as Isaac led us down the tunnel. I made it a point to keep the light in front of him at all times. I wanted to be sure he could see what he was shooting, if it came to that. We eventually stepped into the first cavern. The flashlight's beam bounced off the back wall, the illustration causing nausea to tear through my gut. The drawing of the creature was eerily accurate for how simple it was. "That's the thing," I said, pointing at the mural. "Jesus," Isaac said, walking slowly to the wall. "What the hell is this place?" I looked at Dakota, whose own eyes were locked onto the wall. "What the hell is that thing?" she asked. Isaac stepped to the side. "There's more drawings over here," he said, looking back over his shoulder at me. I frowned, shining a light onto the adjacent wall. He was right. A group of smaller drawings lined to the wall. I stepped up to my friend, holding up the flashlight. The first drawing depicted one of the men from the main mural. In his simplified hands, he held a small creature. Its head resembled that of the monster that took Charlie. The next picture depicted a man strapped to a rock of some kind. The man in the first drawing returned in the second, the small creature now visibly larger than before. "What is this? Some kind of story?" Isaac asked, touching the drawings. I shined the light further down the wall. The next drawing showed the creature much larger than before. About a dozen men stood beside a drawing of a wall, all of them holding what appeared to be chisels. This final drawing led to the large mural on the back wall. This is bizarre, I said, looking once more at Dakota. Her eyes hadn't moved away from the main drawing. I was worried about her. What does it want? Isaac pondered, letting his gun hang from his right hand. A terrifying howl ripped through the cave. I nearly dropped the flashlight in shock. Dakota cried out in terror behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight onto her. The beam of light illuminated her back. Past her, in the mouth of the second tunnel, stood a naked man. He stared at us, completely motionless. I hadn't noticed that it started moving towards Dakota. I stepped up beside her, putting my arm over her chest as Isaac stepped past me, the shotgun firmly in his hands. "Who are you?" he asked, shifting anxiously on his feet. The man remained unmoving. He stared at us with empty eyes. His hand was tightened into a fist. "Who are you?" he asked again, slower than before. The man did not respond once again. I felt Dakota's arm wrap around my own. Isaac took a step forward, raising the shotgun. "I will shoot you. Tell me what you want." The man raised his arm, unclasping his hand. I moved quickly, stepping in front of Dakota. I shut my eyes, fearing the worst. I let my eyes open slowly as the sound of bare feet slapping against the floor echoed through the cave. Isaac stood, staring at the man as he ran back down the tunnel. "What the hell was that about?" I asked. Isaac did not reply. I turned to Dakota, who still gripped my arm. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly, letting go of me. A loud clang echoed through the cavern. I spun, startled. Isaac was now walking towards the tunnel, his shotgun laying on the floor. "Isaac, what are you doing?" I asked, stepping towards him. My heart had started to race. I knew what was going on. Isaac didn't answer. He stepped into the tunnel, beginning to walk towards the creature's home. Dakota sprinted past me. I reached out to stop her, but I was too slow. I followed her as she stepped up behind Isaac, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Isaac, where are you going?" Isaac stopped moving, looking at Dakota without speaking. "What are you doing?" she asked again, shaking him slightly. Isaac blinked. Dakota turned to me, her hair flipping up over her shoulder. Fear was plastered across her face. "Alex, what is this?" Isaac had an odd look in his eyes. Within the span of a second, his hand shot up, grabbing Dakota. His hand wrapped around the first thing he could find. Isaac yanked down on Dakota's hair, causing her to gasp and yelp in pain. "Isaac, what the fuck?" I was moving quickly now. "Isaac, stop!" My friend didn't stop. He had started to walk faster, in fact, dragging Dakota behind him. She had started to swing her arms at him, crying out in pain. I acted quickly. I sprinted towards Isaac, leaping directly into his side. His grip on Dakota didn't loosen as he fell towards the ground. The three of us crashed into the cave floor. Dakota cried out in pain, but I ignored her for now. Isaac was trying to push me off him. His arm came up and connected with the side of my head. His knee jammed into my stomach. I lifted my hand and brought it down hard into Isaac's face. The fist connected with his cheek, the back of his head smacking against the cave floor. Dakota gasped as I pushed my friend into the floor, slapping his face. "Wake up, Isaac, stop!" My friend looked up at me, confused. What the hell just happened? I looked to Dakota, relief flowing through me. Isaac suddenly groaned in pain, rubbing the back of his head. "Did you just fucking punch me?" "You just dragged me into the tunnel, Isaac," Dakota said, kneeling beside him. "Do you not remember that?" "I what?" he asked, his hand reaching for his cheek. "That man, what was he holding in his hand?" I asked, helping my friend to stand. He seemed to have forgotten that the man even existed. "I don't remember. There's just like a gap in my memory. I don't know how to explain it." I returned to the cavern, returning with Isaac's shotgun. Whatever that man did with his hand is connected to the creature somehow. The same thing happened to Charlie. Isaac groaned, realizing that this was all actually happening. "What the fuck, man?" Dakota was looking down the tunnel. "I think we should keep going. The exit is down that way." I nodded. She's right. Isaac didn't argue. The three of us moved down the tunnel. I felt the walls getting closer together as we walked through the cave. The morning sunlight could be seen through the opening at the end of the tunnel. Before long, we'd reach the tunnel that led to the creature's cave. "This is the tunnel up ahead," I said, shining the flashlight in front of us. The light began to seep into the hole in the wall. "This one right here?" Isaac asked, peeking into the tunnel with his shotgun at the ready. He hummed lightly to himself. "It's empty." I nodded, looking at Dakota. The side of her body was covered in dirt. "I'm going inside." Dakota froze. "You're what?" Isaac shook his head. "No, man, you saw what happened to me, to Charlie. You can't." "Nothing will happen if I don't look at whatever the man is holding," I said. "The tunnel leads to a cliff within the cavern. Everything else is happening down below. They won't see me." "Yeah, but they're obviously expecting us," Dakota said, stepping towards me. "Well," I said, stammering. "Then it's probably better that only one of us goes, anyways, just in case." "Alex," Isaac started. "I'll be fine," I said, looking back at Dakota. "I'm the only one who's been inside anyways. I'll be quick." Isaac groaned, rubbing his forehead. "Don't go all the way in," he finally said. "Just look inside and see if you can get Charlie. If anything happens, anything, call out to me. I'll be there." I said nervously, "just protect her, okay?" Dakota blinked, confused as I stared at her. Isaac nodded. "We'll be okay, man. Just promise me." "I'll be fine," I said again, stepping up to the tunnel. I could hear my friends shifting behind me. "Please be careful," Dakota said, whispering for some reason. I didn't respond. I felt the walls begin to squeeze my chest as I pushed through. I felt the walls begin to squeeze my chest as I pushed my way towards the cave. I shut my flashlight off when I reached the tunnel's final turn. I couldn't risk being seen. My knee rubbed against the wall as I shimmied through the tunnel. I could hear the ambient sound of a crowd up ahead. I was getting close. This time, I was ready. I exited the tunnel carefully, crouching as I entered the cave. The creature was the first thing I saw. I stood near the back of the massive cavern, looking down at the crowd of people. They sat, kneeling on their knees. Their backs were straight up as they stared up at the monster. The crowd was chanting something lightly under their breath. I swore I could make out Charlie's face and the massive bodies, but I wasn't completely sure from up on the ledge. I looked back to the creature, fear building inside me the longer I looked at it. Its hollow eye sockets were pointed towards the floor, but I still felt as if it was staring directly at me. I took the time to count its legs. There were 6 of them, 3 protruding from either side of its body. They really did appear to be like a spider's. A large sack of some kind growing near where its groin should be. Behind the creature, I suddenly realized there was a ramp-like slope leading up and around the wall of the cavern. Just as I'd seen it, I heard a soft grunt behind me. I turned, gasping loudly as I made eye contact with one of the naked men. He stood at the top of the slope, staring at me with wide eyes. 2 other men stood behind him, one with a clenched fist. I looked back to the creature, stumbling towards the tunnel as the men began to move. It was looking at me now. "Run!" I cried through the tunnel. A haunting howl entered the tunnel behind me. I could practically feel the men following me as I pushed hard through the tunnel. "Alex!" Dakota cried out. Her voice was getting louder. I turned the corner, finding 2 dark figures standing at the end of the tunnel. I stumbled out of the tunnel, nearly crashing into Dakota. Isaac looked down the hole in the wall, his eyes becoming wider as he saw the men approaching us. I pushed Dakota towards the exit as Isaac stood in front of the tunnel. "Stay away," he said, his voice trailing off. A gunshot echoed around the tunnel as I moved with Dakota. Dakota gasped as Isaac fired. A loud cry of pain escaped from the tunnel. The creature howled in return from deep in the cave. Isaac eventually stepped out into the morning light behind us, leaning on his knees. "Jesus fucking Christ," he said, trying to catch his breath. "Did you find Charlie?" Dakota asked. I think so," I said, breathing heavily. It was so hard to tell. "What the fuck do we do now?" Isaac said, looking back at the tunnel. The other men were nowhere to be seen. "We can't go back now," Dakota said, shaking her head slowly. "There's no way we'll be able to get Charlie after that." "We need to come back when they aren't expecting us," I said. "I shook you out of the trance, Isaac. Maybe we can still help Charlie." "I'd only just been put into it, Alex," Isaac said, rubbing his face. "We don't know for sure that it will work with Charlie. Plus, who knows whether or not these people will ever not know we're coming." I sighed. He was probably right. "I'm not leaving Charlie, Isaac." "Neither am I," Dakota spoke up. Another howl exploded from the cave. It was a pain to cry. We'd killed one of its followers. It couldn't be very happy. Isaac shook his head, looking away. He finally spoke after a short time. "I hope you know that I want to help him, Alex. I'd die in order to save him. You just have to see that this doesn't seem very possible." I nodded. I know, but what choice do we have? Isaac sighed. Tonight then, he said. We'll come back tonight with more materials. We'll kill that fucking thing and we'll get Charlie back, okay? I couldn't help but feel that the plan was far-fetched, but God, did I want it to be possible? I'm in. So am I, Dakota said. We have to stick together in this. Dakota, I started. I can take care of myself, Alex, she said. You can't stop me. I couldn't help but smile. Tonight then. We rented a motel room about 20 minutes away from the trail. There are only 2 beds. Isaac decided to take a nap out in the car. We needed to rest before tonight. Dakota is snoring softly on the other side of the room. I don't want her to go with us tonight, but there's almost nothing I can do to stop her. I don't blame her though. I love these guys. Isaac, Charlie, Josh, especially Dakota. I put a lot of thought into this. I'd rather die trying to save Charlie than live knowing I left him to suffer like this. I know the others feel the same way. I need to get some sleep. I have a long night ahead of me. If I don't update you all tomorrow, I'm sure you all can figure out what happened. If you had told me a week ago that Josh would be the one to get the best part of this deal, then I would have never believed you. After posting my update yesterday, I lay down my head and tried to sleep. For a long time, I stared at the ceiling, or at the back of my eyelids, waiting for sleep to take over. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it staring back at me. I finally fell asleep around 3 in the afternoon. I woke up at just past 5 to find Dakota's hand on my shoulder. Hey, Alex, it's almost time to get going, she said, lightly shaking me awake. I sat up in bed, running my hand through my hair. I could tell that it was sticking up. God, I was exhausted. Just a few more hours, I joked, sighing as I realized humor couldn't take my mind off the day's schedule. You're telling me, Dakota said, standing at the sink. I watched her closely in the mirror as she splashed water onto her face. I sighed once more, looking at my cell phone. I could see that some of you had commented on my update. Almost all of you were in agreement. I needed to go to the police. Hey, Dakota, I said, scrolling through my phone. She said, drying her face with a cloth she'd found in the nearby drawer. I think we should call the police, I said, chewing on my lower lip. She looked at me in the mirror for a moment before turning over her shoulder. Why? I sighed, setting my cell phone down. Look, Dakota, this is too much for us. That thing is unpredictable. We know nothing about it. What are we supposed to do anyways? I said. Do you actually believe that we'll be able to kill it by ourselves? Do you actually believe that we'll be able to kill this thing by ourselves? Dakota lowered her eyes. Alex, she said, groaning. I just don't know. But if they try to kill everyone inside, what if they kill Charlie? I sighed. We're all going to die if we don't get some help, I said. Charlie has no chance of living if we go in alone. I'm sure of it. Plus, I want you to be safe. The police can do that. Dakota gave me a look, setting herself on her bed, facing me. You don't have to worry so much about me, Alex. I can handle myself. I nodded slowly, my brain churning. This was my time. I wasn't sure we'd be alive this time tomorrow. So fuck it, right? Dakota, I'm sorry, I said, scratching the back of my neck. I'm just worried. I don't want you to get hurt, okay? I care about you a lot. You have no idea. Dakota sighed, closing her eyes. You know I used to like you too, right? I blinked. What? Dakota nodded. I forced myself to move on. You never said anything to me about it, so I just thought you didn't feel the same way, she said, opening her eyes. And I waited, Alex. I stammered. Dakota. I just didn't want to ruin anything between us. Dakota held up a hand. Let's talk about this tomorrow, okay? She said, giving me a polite smile. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment as I nodded. Somewhere inside of me, though, joy had begun to form. She wanted to keep the conversation going. Just not right now. She was right, after all. We had bigger things to worry about. I tried my hardest to push away the conversation. So, I said, squinting, the police? Dakota nodded. You're probably right, Alex, she said, sighing. I hope you're right. Let's talk to Isaac, I said, slipping on my shoes. Dakota stepped out the door to the parking lot, leaving it open. I made sure to slip my phone into my pocket before heading outside. I could see Isaac slumped over in the front seat when Dakota approached his window. His mouth was hanging wide open. Isaac jumped as Dakota knocked on the window, not expecting to be woken up so suddenly. He rubbed his eyes, lowering the window. Jesus, can you be any louder? And I was in the middle of a good dream, too. Dakota smiled, opening the backseat door. What was it? Isaac shrugged as I sat in the passenger seat. I don't remember. I just know I wasn't here. He said, sighing. What's going on? We should head to the trail soon, Dakota said, glancing towards me. And Alex, I think we should go to the police, I said, nodding towards her. Isaac cracked a smile. I'm honestly glad you said it. We really shouldn't be doing this alone. I nodded, unable to shake that feeling that I was making a mistake. It's probably for the best. I don't think we can do this alone. Isaac looked at Dakota in the rearview mirror. Let's get to it then. Isaac was the one to call 911. We had talked for a short time before he made the call, discussing what we planned to say. We decided that we'd tell the operator that our friend had simply disappeared while we were hiking. I was certain that they received calls like that all the time. Several times throughout their conversation, the woman on the phone asked if Charlie would have considered just running away. I imagine she didn't want to waste resources on a missing persons case when it was only an adult male who has every right to leave town without telling anyone. Once we'd made it clear that he was likely in danger, she let us know that some officers would meet us at the trail. We sat in Isaac's truck for a little while, waiting for the officers to arrive. It had been nearly 30 minutes now. A police car appeared suddenly at the end of the road. The siren was off. I looked through the windshield as the police officer pulled his car into the parking lot. There were 2 men in the car, both of them staring at their cell phones. They didn't appear to be in any rush. The officer in the driver's seat stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his pants. He was quite heavy, with a thick brown mustache on his lip. Quite the stereotypical police officer, you could say. The officer looked at me from the other side of the parking lot, pointing. Are you Eric? I turned to Isaac, disbelief entering my gut. Was he serious? Yeah, I called out. That's us. The man nodded and leaned back into his car, speaking to the officer in the passenger seat. The second officer looked to be in his early 30s. He was in much better shape than the first officer. The officer approached us. The first one spoke. "I'm Officer Warren," he said, pointing to the other man. "This is Officer Thompson. Can I get your names?" "This is Alex and Dakota," Isaac said, pointing to each of us. "My name is Isaac, by the way." "Aw, my bad," Officer Warren said, smiling. "The radios have been acting up all day. I could hardly hear a damn thing." "You're lucky we showed up to the right place." The other cop laughed, but I did not find their joke very amusing. Neither did Dakota, apparently. "Can we please hurry? I feel like our friend might be in danger." The officer sighed softly, nodding. A new look had entered his eyes. "Of course. Where did you last see him?" "Well, the four of us chose to walk off the hiking path," Isaac said, choosing to not mention Josh. "I figured that was probably a good idea." "We can take you to where we last saw him." The officer nodded slowly. "And the three of you have no reason to believe that he was upset in any way? Did he ever show interest in running away? Did he ever seem suicidal?" I shook my head. "No, he didn't trust us." Officer Warren nodded, looking to Thompson. "All right, well, you three better show us the right way then." Isaac nodded, leaning into the back of his truck. Warren eyed him, confused. When he returned with his shotgun. "And what the hell is that for?" Isaac blinked, looking at his weapon. "It's for protection. I don't know what we're going to find out there." Warren shook his head. "We can protect you. Put that weapon back in your vehicle, please," he said, pointing at Isaac's truck. "I don't feel comfortable with you having a loaded weapon." Isaac sighed. "My dad was a cop, officer. I don't want to hurt you, believe me. You're the only way I'm getting my friend back," he said. It was the first truthful thing he'd said to the officer so far. Warren groaned, rubbing his forehead. He turned back at us with a look of empathy in his eyes. "Come on, then." The three of us led the officers down the trail in silence. I was beginning to feel regretful. Why had they only sent 2 officers? I tried to calm myself down. They would surely call in more once they found out how big of an issue this really was. Hell, maybe they'd call in the army too. Warren was huffing by the time Isaac had started to walk off the trail. "Jesus, I don't know how people do this for fun." He sighed. A ring of sweat had formed around his collar. Isaac looked over his shoulder, stepping over a large rock. "We went this way." I noticed what Isaac had done. We were heading towards the cave's exit, rather than wasting our time moving through the canyon. It was smart. "Why the hell did you kids come out this way anyways?" Officer Thompson said, speaking for the first time. His voice was deeper than I'd imagined. "We were being stupid," Dakota said, looking at me. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thompson nodded, saying something quietly into the radio that sat on his shoulder. I had no idea what the words meant. Warren had seen the cave before Isaac had even pointed it out. "Did you four go inside?" Isaac shook his head. "No, we thought maybe it was a wolf den or something." Warren nodded, looking toward his partner. "Do you have any reason to believe he went into that cave?" he asked us. A haunting wail escaped from the mouth of the cave. Officer Warren jolted in shock, instinctively reaching for his gun. "What the hell was that?" Thompson started speaking to his radio once more as Warren approached the cave, his gun in his hand. Isaac had just started to approach the cave when Warren held his hand up, stopping him. "No, stay back." Isaac took a step back, looking at me, fear in his eyes. I know that he wanted to tell them what they were up against. Thompson moved up alongside Warren, and the two entered the cave. Dakota stepped up beside me, pressed against my side. Her presence always seemed to calm me somehow. Mike, there's a tunnel up here," Thompson said, shining a flashlight down the narrow tunnel that led to the creature. Officer Warren spoke into his radio before looking back down the main corridor. Thompson stepped into the new tunnel, pushing his way through the tight space. "We have to warn them," Dakota said, looking at me. "What could we even do?" "Hey!" I called out, Warren looking my direction. "Be careful. There's something huge in there. I don't know what it is." "It's all right. Just stay there," he said, huffing as he squeezed into the tunnel. I couldn't imagine how he would fit all the way through. "We're going to bring your friend back. Don't worry." "We're serious," Isaac called out. Warren had already stepped into the tunnel, pushing his way towards hell. "We have to help them," Isaac called over to us, stepping into the cave. I swore under my breath, following him. Dakota was right by my side the entire time. I approached the tunnel, looking inside. The officers were nowhere to be seen. They had already gone around the corner. They would be there soon. I could hear them grunting as they moved through the tunnel. "Oh my God! Fuck! Dakota whispered. She was panicking. I placed my hand on her shoulder. "Calm down, Dakota. It'll be okay." She nodded, and the three of us listened. Seconds later, I could hear a loud commotion coming from inside the cavern. One of the officers, Thompson, I believe, cried out in fear. Warren shouted a command and immediately fired his weapon. The sounds of gunfire escaped from the tunnel. I felt as if I were the one getting shot. An intense, guttural scream came from down in the cave, and within seconds it was gone. Isaac had heard enough. "This is it. We need to go help them," he said, stepping into the tunnel. A sound to my right caused me to gasp. I turned, finding a dozen naked men standing next to the exit. They stared at us, their arms at their sides. "Oh my God," Dakota said, stepping backwards into me. Isaac finally noticed the people standing in the exit. He lifted a shotgun, half standing in the tunnel. "Stay back." I stared at the people, my heart pounding. My palms had started to sweat. I hadn't noticed, but Dakota had grabbed my hand. A loud grunt sounded from behind me. I spun, watching as Isaac was tackled to the cave floor. A second naked man emerged from the tunnel as Isaac's shotgun slid across the ground. The men stood over Isaac and held him down as he began to squirm. I felt a hand grasp my arm. I turned to see that we had been completely surrounded by the nude men. My hand was ripped from Dakota's as I was shoved to the floor by two of the men. Dakota shouted my name, but I could hardly hear over the sounds of the scuffle. I was finally pulled to my feet by two of the men. Isaac stood feet away from me, struggling to free his arm from the man that held him back. A large man reared back his fist and plunged it into Isaac's stomach. My friend gasped in pain, his knees crumpling as he hung limp in the men's arms. I was shoved quickly towards the tunnel. I managed to look at Dakota one more time before entering the tunnel. Tears were starting to fill her eyes. I had done this. I had fucking killed her. Pain filled my body as I was forced through the tight tunnel. I cried out, attempting to stop my captors, but they refused to slow down. None of the men had spoken since they found us. They remained completely silent as they forced us down the tunnel. I flopped down onto the floor at the end of the passage. As I looked up, I made direct eye contact with a creature who sat in the back of the cave, its legs folded underneath it. I stood quickly and sprung, punching one of the men in the jaw. My fist immediately began to hurt as the man recoiled. Several of the other men stepped up to me, grabbing me by my arms and legs. I was lifted into the air. My legs kicked out in an attempt to free myself, but it was no use. With one final cry, I was tossed off the edge of the cliff. I plummeted towards the cave floor. I watched the ceiling move farther away as I waited for my back to smash into the rocks below. I crashed into the crowd of people. I fell directly on one of the members of the crowd, the two of us stumbling to the floor. He moaned in pain as I crashed into him, the breath knocked completely out of my lungs. The smell of body odor and shit immediately filled my nostrils. I gagged as I was dragged by the men through the horde. In my daze, I swore I could see several women among the crowd. I was thrown from the edge of the crowd into a small clearing near the middle of the cavern. I pushed myself slowly to my feet, attempting to catch my breath. I fell quickly back to the floor as I looked up towards the creature, who sat directly in front of me. It did not seem to be bothered by my presence. I scooted backwards, suddenly wanting to return to the crowd. Movement from behind the creature caught my attention. The men from before had carried Isaac and Dakota down from the ledge using the pathway. Perhaps I had been too aggressive for them to care to deal with. The man holding Isaac stepped around the creature. Isaac was staring up at the thing in complete awe. He hadn't seen it before. My friend was tossed before me. Isaac smashed his face into the stone floor, coughing as he landed. I looked back towards the men. Dakota was walking with them, calmer now. She looked as if she had given up. The men carried Dakota through the crowd. Isaac was now standing, staring at the monster. "What the fuck?" he said, looking over to me. I finally noticed the large rock on the other side of the room. The men carried Dakota towards the rock as she continued to cry. "Let her go!" I cried out. I knew there was no use, but the words came out anyways. The men from earlier began to join the crowd. One, near the front, held Isaac's shotgun firmly in his hands. I couldn't help but notice a new, heavier face in the crowd. Warren's large body, now completely naked. I looked back to Isaac, who continued to stare at the creature. "Isaac," I said, moving towards him. My friend ignored me. "Isaac, what do we do?" Isaac looked at me, his eyes blank. I could hear Dakota start to scream. I spun quickly, watching as the men began to hold Dakota against the rock. A new man slowly began to wrap rope around her, tying her in place. "Dakota, stay calm!" I called out, but I doubt she heard me. The man began to tie a knot at the end of the rope as Dakota attempted to kick. Her legs had been strapped down, though, so she merely wiggled beneath the tight restraints. The large crowd began to close in around Dakota. An old woman stepped up to Dakota, grabbing onto the lower hem of her shorts. I watched as the crowd began to slowly tear apart Dakota's clothing. She had started to sob now. I could feel an unbelievable rage forming inside me Don't fucking touch her! I cried out, running toward the crowd. A large man blocked my path. I swung my fist. The blow barely affected the man. He pushed against my chest, the action sending me flying backwards. I landed hard on my ass, pain shooting up my spine. I rolled over to my side, pushing myself to my feet. The man stepped towards me. Isaac took the moment. My friend, using the distraction my outburst created, ran forward. He grasped a shotgun in his hands, tugging on it. The man who held it appeared to be startled. He attempted to fight back, but Isaac was too fast. Isaac kicked the man in the knee, causing him to let go of the weapon. Isaac took a step back, cocking the shotgun. "Stay the fuck back." He must have known that he couldn't take all of them like that. Frankly, I don't think he cared. I looked back towards the rock. Dakota was staring directly at me. I felt completely defeated in that moment. Was this my fault? Isaac was going to die in this cave. I was going to die in this cave. "Dakota!" I called out. I wanted to say it at least once. I love you." She started to cry harder. At that point, I was satisfied. I was ready to die then, if it came to that. I shifted on my feet as the large man began to walk towards me. I had no idea how to defend myself from a man of this size, but I knew I had to do something quickly. A loud bang exploded from my left. The lower half of the large man's face was ripped off as Isaac fired his shotgun. I looked to my friend, shocked. He was looking at me with an odd look in his eyes, like he knew what was about to happen. A man from the crowd began to panic and charged towards Isaac. Isaac spun, firing the shotgun. A large hole appeared in the man's chest as he slumped to the ground. I hadn't seen the creature moving, and neither had Isaac. By the time Isaac had noticed, it was too late. My friend spun, aiming the shotgun at the monster, but the creature was too fast. Its head crashed into my friend, sending him flying towards me. He flopped over onto his side, about 10 yards away from me. The creature moved quickly. I watched as the monster knelt down, taking Isaac's legs into its jaws. My friend cried out in pain as he was lifted up into the air, his legs bending at horrific angles. The creature lifted its head and in one swift movement placed Isaac into its mouth. A loud, wet snap filled the air as the creature crushed my best friend alive. Dakota had started to scream hysterically from the other side of the room. I couldn't move. I was in complete shock. My brain had not yet processed that I'd just witnessed my friend die. He died saving me. The creature began to chew on Isaac's corpse, feasting. I pushed hard against the ground, sliding towards the back wall. My eyes landed on Isaac's shotgun. It was resting on the cave floor, directly beneath the creature. The monster noticed me moving as the crowd began to erupt behind it. Its massive head lowered, the long antlers scraping against the ceiling as it did so. Its dark, hollow eye sockets became a dark red as chunks of flesh fell from the empty holes. I didn't have much time. I pushed myself clumsily to my feet, sprinting directly towards the creature. I heard it howl in confusion as I ducked beneath it, reaching for the shotgun. My fingers wrapped around the weapon just as the creature bit down onto my left leg. I cried out in pain, gripping the shotgun as hard as I could. I watched as the ground began to fall away from me. The crowd stared up at me as I was lifted into the air. I had tried my best to push aside my pain. I cocked the shotgun, just as Isaac had, and aimed it towards the creature's mouth. I fired. The blast tore through the creature's face, blowing a hole in its skull. It opened its mouth, dropping me and letting out a shrill cry of pain. The entire room had fallen silent. My back smacked against the ground. I rolled over quickly onto my stomach, attempting to stand. The crowd no longer looked at me. I turned over my shoulder. The creature had stumbled into a nearby wall, wailing. I pushed myself up, holding the shotgun in my hand. I couldn't feel the pain in my leg anymore. As I approached the creature, my eyes landed on the sack that protruded from the creature's groin. I took my chance. I lifted the shotgun, firing into the sack. The creature cried out in pain, looking down at me. The left half of its lower jaw was missing. I fired a second time, and a third. The creature struggled to remain standing. It fell to one of its knees, scrambling in an attempt to stand. The contents of the sack became too much for the damaged exterior. The skin tore. An audible ripping sound filled the air. A small hunk of meat fell from the sack, followed by two more. They remained attached to the creature by long, meaty cords. Umbilical cords? The creature slipped in the large pool of its own blood. It toppled into the side of the cliff, its antlers crashing against the rock wall. Shards of bone flew across the room as the creature slumped to the ground, unmoving. The room remained eerily silent for several seconds. All at once, a horrid cacophony began to fill the room. The crowd erupted into an intense sobbing. My eyes scanned the room. What the fuck was going on? A man a few feet in front of me fell to his knees, tears flowing from his eyes. A woman near the back of the room began to shriek. The man in front of me reached down to the floor, lifting a large rock. He forced the rock up into his face, a loud pop indicating that his nose had been broken. I watched in horror as the man lowered the rock from his face. Blood began to pour from his nose as the rock crashed into his forehead. The man began to repeatedly beat himself in the face with the rock, eventually falling completely to the ground. His body continued to thrash around in pain as the man behind him began to watch. They were killing themselves. I scanned the room, trying to find Charlie. I'd come this far. I didn't want to lose another friend today. I moved further into the cave, stepping over a man who had started repeatedly smashing his skull into the floor. As I ran, a body fell from the ledge above me. The man's head smashed into the floor, immediately splitting open. His neck bent at a disturbing angle as he landed, which killed him instantly. I recognized the man as Thompson, but I tried to ignore my feelings. I needed to find Charlie. I found him on the edge of the cavern. He was standing in the corner, smashing his head into the stone wall. I was on top of him within seconds. The two of us crashed to the floor. Charlie's hands immediately beating against my back as I attempted to hold him down. Charlie's hands moved to his face, his fist connecting with his nose. I held down his arms as best I could. What was I supposed to do now? I looked around the room. Nearly the entire horde had killed themselves by this point. Some people writhed in pain as the final signs of life slipped from their bodies. Others climbed slowly to the top of the ledge in an attempt to end their lives by falling. A groan sounded from the other side of the room. I looked over to an older woman who held a rock in her hands. Her weak beating had begun to slow down. A new look had entered her eyes. One by one, the surviving members of the crowd began to wake up. A man stood up from the floor, a large gash in his forehead. He looked around the room, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. "Alex?" a soft voice called. I looked back to Charlie, who was looking up at me with confusion in his eyes. "Charlie?" I asked, continuing to hold him down. "What the hell is going on?" He asked, looking down towards his exposed groin. I fell backwards off my friend, groaning as the pain returned to my leg. My eyes moved immediately to Dakota. She remained tied to that rock, staring directly at me. I ran to her, finding a sharp rock on the ground. The rock tore through the ropes, allowing her to slide down to the ground. She stood, half naked, scratch marks in the skin where her clothes had been ripped off. We didn't speak. Dakota threw her arms around my neck and began to sob. I held her for a while, watching silently as the survivors began to regroup and try to figure out what had happened. The police arrived soon after. Warren must have called for backup before entering the cave. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to go home. I traded one friend for another yesterday. Isaac is a fucking hero. He was my best friend. I'll never forget what he did for us. For me. Charlie seemed to be doing okay, or as well as he could be, at least. The police are holding him for questioning, but I don't think he'll be charged with anything, obviously. The corpse of the creature in the cave should be evidence enough. Josh has no idea any of this happened. I plan to talk to him after this is all over. I don't know how I'm supposed to explain this to him. God, I hope he understands. Dakota, she slept over at my place last night. She didn't want to be alone. She spent a lot of her time crying in my room. I don't blame her. As for me, I'm doing okay, I guess. I still feel as if none of yesterday's events were real, but I'm constantly reminded by the fact that Isaac isn't here sitting next to me. I apparently shot off one of my toes when I fired at the creature's face. That kind of sucks, I guess. I'd have chosen to lose my legs too, if that meant that Isaac could come home. I got a weird call this morning. They said they were some government agency that deals with this kind of thing. Apparently, they just recently worked on this one case with these kids down in the Everglades back in November. I don't know what they want, or what any of this means, but I don't really care, to be honest. I just want to get this ridiculous questioning over with and get on with my life. Thanks for following my story. It was nice to put this down in words. Hell, if I hadn't taken your advice, things probably wouldn't have gone the way they had. It could have gone so much worse, and probably would have too. So for that, I thank you so much. Hello, everyone that made it to the end. Just wanted to say, first off, thank you so much for getting me to 1,000 subscribers in just under 2 months of having my channel up. My mind is blown and I love it. You guys are all amazing, fantastic people, and every day I'm just so excited that I get to be a part of this. And secondly, I really hope everyone enjoyed the story. I absolutely loved it. Had so much fun recording it. The author really outdid himself here, and I'm really glad I got the whole 3-part series into one video. So I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. And with that, I hope everyone has a fantastic night. I'll see you next week.